Hey farmers and landowners, this is Damian Mason coming at you with a question. Have you ever had disease or pest problems cost you money by reducing your yield? Well, of course you have. We fight this, right? That's what production agriculture is all about, is working as best we can to put out a great yield, and to do so oftentimes you've got to overcome disease and pests. The problem is we usually treat those diseases and pests after the problem, right? So what if you could do it proactively? What if you had a tool that gave you predictive analytics so that you would know if you have things like corn rootworm, soybean cyst nematode, sudden death syndrome? Well, you have that tool now. It's from Pattern Ag. Pattern Ag doing predictive soil analytics way beyond just the old days of sticking a probe in the ground every few acres and saying, hey, wow, we got some nitrogen deficiency here. They'll let you know if you have pest and disease. Go to pattern.ag. That's www.pattern.ag to learn more about this awesome technology and how it can help you increase your yields by taking care of diseases and pests before they cause you harm. Well, greetings and welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. It's me, Damian Mason. You knew that when you tuned in. Got a great program for you today because I've got a returning guest. He's a friend of the show at this point. He's been on so many times. He's Mac Marshall. He's the VP of Market Intelligence for, help me out here, United States Soybean.
United Soybean Board, USB, just like the computer thing.
United Soybean Board. Anyway, he's talking today about the Innovation Challenge. Also, here we are recording this at the very end of 2022, and we're going to talk about where we are on soybeans. When he was last with us, Mac and I talked about the fact that in some circles, renewable diesel is getting so much chatter. The corn belt / soybean belt is all just clamoring over the idea that we're going to need 18 million more acres of soybeans for renewable diesel. We kind of talked about that last time. Is it reality? Because that would be a 20% increase in soybean acres. And we talked about whether that's really going to happen. So we're going to talk about renewable diesel, the markets year end, and some things are happening on the soybean news, as well as the Innovation Challenge. Take me away, my friend.
Well, first, let's start with the Soybean Innovation Challenge. Soy Innovation Challenge. So this is something that we are sponsoring in conjunction with the Yield Lab Institute, which is an offshoot of the Yield Lab, really focused on early and mid-stage startup prospecting, trying to build an incubator network. And this is actually the second innovation challenge that we've done. We did one in 2020. And this one is really focused on soybean meal. So we're looking to enhance known uses of soy meal. Soy meal, of course, primarily used in animal agriculture. But we're putting out a casting call to all innovators out there, companies small and large, universities as well, for innovations that do a couple of things. One, increase the use and value for soy meal in animal ag, aquaculture, pet foods, and of course, soy foods for human consumption, but that also enhance the commercial viability of these existing uses in both the food and feed space. I think, really critically as well, looking for innovations that can advance the transportation and storability of soy meal. So soy meal, as we know, it doesn't store, nearly as long as whole beans. We've traditionally been primarily a whole bean exporter. And as we see a lot of changes here domestically, you alluded to the crush expansion and renewable diesel and everything, and we'll come back to all that in a little bit. But as we look out in the years ahead, as more and more crush plants are scheduled to come online, and there's of course a lot of capital investment in that, that means we're going to have increased availability of soy meal. So we have these great utilization channels in the field of animal agriculture. So what are ways that we can kind of scale that up and draw out increased value for soy farmers? So it's really exciting. I think this is an opportunity for innovators who are interested in the soy and soy meal space to get involved here. We're offering $170,000 in cash prizes. Amazon Web Services also signed on as a sponsor for cloud computing. And we have, of course, the Yield Lab Institute as the operational lead on this, but also Solus Agrisciences. It's kind of a novel discovery firm based out of St.
So wait,
Louis.
you're giving away the $170,000. A grant, or it's what is the $170,000? How do I get it?
So that's a prize for the innovators, and it'll probably be distributed across a couple different winners. We had a couple winners the last time at different tiers to help advance their the initiative that they're undertaking, their innovations.
Okay, so who is going to be submitting their recommendations, their ideas? Is it going to be like a university group, like 3 food scientists at Kansas State University that are working on this? Who's going to be coming to you with this?
I mean, there's a possibility that if I'm thinking about the universe of applicants that we had back in 2020, we had some universities, but the vast majority, smaller, earlier stage startups that saw an interest and promise in the soy field at large. So we had everything from on-field production research towards looking at ecosystems and carbon credits and everything. So really full spectrum there. This is a little bit more focused, again, really focused on soybean meal, looking at ways to enhance uptake and utilization in animal agriculture and human uses, of course. And then in the spring, because there might be innovators who are excited about soy meal, but maybe not its traditional applications. In the spring, we're going to be partnering with Yield Out again on another challenge that is more focused on novel and new applications for soy meal. Because again, in the years to come, as we see most of this crush expansion come online, we're going to have increased availability of high quality product here in the form of soy meal, and certainly want to continue to drive use in our existing channels.
There you go.
But the versatility of the bean and the versatility of the meal and oil from that come out of it, there's other applications for that too. So we want to hear from scientists and discoverers who are interested in exploring those avenues.
So I want to ask you that. So I know we've done this before, but for the person that's tuning in and they didn't hear you and I discuss this previously, we produce 90 million acres of soybeans in the United States. It's like 4.5 billion bushels. Is that my number roughly?
Yeah, roughly. Yep.
Okay.
87 million acres last year, but we've been at 90 before. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. 87 million acres. Thanks for correcting me. So I was off by 4%. 87 million acres, 4.5 billion bushels. Raw soybeans, meaning they just come out of the field. We clean them up a little bit. About half of them we export, and about half of the exports go to China. So it's our biggest agricultural export in terms of a commodity. And about half of what we grow in the United States, we export. Half of what we export goes to China, roughly.
Yeah, I think that's a fair breakdown there. Yeah, about 2.2 billion bushels going to export, and China's consuming about 30 million tons of that, which works out to just over 1 billion bushels.
So then, and those go as just a soybean, just like it came out of the hull in the field. And then the ones that stay here,
whole bean going through that export channel. Yep.
The beans that stay here. Now, this is where the thing about crush and grind and all that. And so just to refresh the person that's listening, because they're saying, hey, man, I'm in the asparagus production business in Ontario. What the hell's all this thing? Talk to me real quickly about the crush and the grind and the part that goes to diesel, the part that goes to animal feed, et cetera.
Yeah. And great ground setting here. So yeah, as you said, we produce, we'll call it 120 million tons. I'll talk metric. It's easier for me. 120 million tons of soybeans roughly across the country. We export about half of that in the form of whole beans. I think this last year we had about 57 million metric tons. So let's hold that aside for that export channel and then focus on the domestic crush. As you said, we crush about half of it as well. So call that 60 million tons. And when you crush a whole bean, we think of it as an oil seed, but really it's a protein seed that also produces oil. You get about 4 times as much meal as you do oil when you crush it. So you want to crush, call it 100 pounds of soybeans, you're going to get about 79 pounds of meal, about 19 pounds of oil, and some hulls and everything can go back and forth. So what do we do with all that once those two co-products, as we call them, meal and oil, are produced? Well, 97% of the domestically produced or domestically consumed soybean meal goes into animal ag. Actually, I should back up a little bit. So of the roughly, call it, 40 plus million metric tons of soy meal that we're producing, about 3/4 of that goes into domestic animal agriculture. So about 34 million tons annually, and we export just about 12 and change.
Okay, so and I want to go back again. Of the soybean, it's almost like 80% of a soybean ends up as meal, 20%, and I'm using rough numbers. I know
Yep.
real close to 20% is
80-20.
oil. And the oil has always had a place on, say, food, at the dinner plate, and all kinds of processed foods, and et cetera. And now we're beginning to use oil for fuel. We use the soybean oil for the fuel. And so we've always had this meal. And correct me here, Mac, the meal was always the easy thing. When I was a kid on the dairy farm, we used soybean meal as a protein source in our rations for the cattle. And it's like the consumption of oil has gotten more and more over the last 40 years, whereas the meal obviously has always been animal feed. And now kind of what I'm hearing you say is we need a few more places to go with meal, as opposed to where it's always gone to animal feed anyhow, but now we want the oil, and so we need a place to burn some meal. Is that kind of what the idea of the innovation challenge?
Well, it's an interesting rebalancing, because as you said, meal has been the traditional value driver. It's traditionally held about 65-70% of the value to crushers, up until really a couple of years ago. And then as the market started reevaluating the value of oil, we've used it in biodiesel and commercial applications for, better part of the last 20 years or so. Biodiesel industry started getting established in the 90s in the US, really started taking off with commercial viability in the early to mid 2000s. But now renewable diesel, next generation biofuel, chemically different from biodiesel, and chemically equivalent to petroleum diesel. With all of the excitement around this, we've seen a reevaluation of oil values. They've come up very high and they've come back down, but they're structurally higher than where they've been over a longer term period. So what you've seen is at times meal and oil, in terms of contribution of value to the crush, trading at parity, even though meal is 80% of that crush volume, as you said there, and the oil's 20%. So we've had a shift in that, where over the balance of 2022, oil's carried about 45% of the value, as opposed to its traditional 30 to 33%. But we have seen a little bit of a reversal of that in the last couple of weeks, which I think is. Would you
just say oil lately is averaged how much of the value?
Over the course of 2022, it's about 45%. If you look at the average,
so it's 20% of the bean.
45% of the value.
But it's 45% of the value. And so that's where the innovation now is, to make sure that we don't lose value for the meal.
Exactly. We're going to have increased availability of a high quality product here used in animal ag. So, how do we think about other avenues for increasing soybean meal use in animal ag rations? We've seen decline in swine rations over the last 15, 20 years or so from synthetic amino acids. So is this an opportunity to help regain that, and through research and innovation and really having kind of an open innovation network here, are there innovators and researchers out there who can maybe unlock some of those opportunities for increased utilization? Now, that's, of course, going to play in domestic and international markets as we move more and more of this meal. But it's interesting. We've actually seen meal values hold really strong over the last couple of weeks, even as oil values have come down. A couple of weeks ago, news out of D.C. was that the renewable volume obligations are coming out with targets for the next couple of years, which are maybe a little bit less, definitely less aggressive than what a lot of the industry was expecting, and a lot of where the private sector investment and other data is pointing towards. So,
wait. You've got so much. You've just got so much. And I want to point this out to our listeners. I like almost no one, but I like Mac Marshall. I mean, let's face it. I'm very misanthropic. I hate humans. And you're like, oh, come on, Damian. You're a funny guy. All right. But anyway, I like Mac. Anyway,
it goes both ways, and believe me, I think I have the same general misanthropy. I don't know how to pronounce the noun there, but
I
you
call
know
it
what I'm saying.
misanthropic, but anyway, the point is, I would say because and you can look it up, dear listener. You always learn something here at the Business of Agriculture. It means a person who has disdain for humanity. Okay, so anyway, I want to talk about the value and I want to talk about the investment. Before I do that, I want to remind our listeners that the Business of Agriculture podcast is available not only where you get all your podcasts, Stitcher, iTunes, etc., SoundCloud, but also it's a video, and it's not just on YouTube on the Damian Mason channel. It's also now on Acres TV. The Hefty brothers up in Baltic, South Dakota, invented their own media platform. It's called Acres TV. Watch acrestv.com. Go to it, and you can find this as well as other cool ag stuff. And I also want to remind you that if you need information, as most agricultural people do, I'm told that 19% of a farmer's time is searching for answers and information. Why don't you shorten your curve by going to AgVisor Pro? It's an app on your phone. Go to agvisorpro.com. It's very easy. AgVisor Pro. Just get out your smartphone, go to your app store, AgVisor Pro. It's all about information experts. You can become an expert, in fact, on AgVisor Pro. It's a platform for information exchange. AgVisor Pro. Go there and check it out. It's easy. It's free. It's on your phone. All right. The investment. Not being mean here, Buddy Mac, but $170,000 worth of grants, there's got to be millions of dollars of money going into innovation for new applications of soybean meal from other sources. Isn't $170,000 a little paltry compared to the potential benefit of finding new utilization for soybean meal?
Well, I think anytime you're, providing a financial carrot there and everything that's going to incentivize in additional investment and everything, certainly the payoff down the line is going to be higher. That's just, simple risk reward and time value and everything. Yep. What we're really looking to do is, look, each year we're investing literally tens of millions of dollars in research, education, and promotion through our traditional funding cycles. What we're hoping to achieve here through this partnership with Yield Lab and operational partners with Solis and AWS is, how do we get into some of these innovation pathways that maybe we haven't traditionally partnered with or haven't traditionally looked at or haven't, traditionally come in through our request for proposal process. So it's about opening the proverbial aperture or kimono, whatever opening you want to use there. So that we get a better lens at it, and there's an opportunity for maybe some early stage companies which are potentially promising, but maybe don't have some of the other startup capital accessible. Our winner a couple of years ago actually has gone on, I think, to have several rounds of private funding after winning in 2020. So it also, I think, does create a runway and headlines and recognition of opportunity and viability of whatever innovations are coming forward as well. So there's a momentum component as well.
Okay, so you're the VP of Market Intelligence. You have lots of market intelligence. What is this all doing? First off, when we chatted back in October, it was about the fact that we've got this new hype about renewable diesel. Soybean prices still are pretty darn good, looks like to me. Demand is staying strong. Our output a little off in 2022 because of some dry weather west of the river. So our production is going to be down. What's the estimate?
Well, our total crop size, I mean, even with a lot of drought pressure throughout much of the year, we still came in with the fourth largest crop on record, 117 million metric tons. I mean, trailing last year or 2021 and a couple other years within the last decade.
So we're off by a couple percent from last year.
A couple percentage points. So and I talked to farmers who are obviously living the whole season and living the weather patterns day to day, week to week, trying to find the right suitable days for field work. And when it came time to harvest time, say, okay, what's your crop looking like? Say, well, you really got to tip your hat to the bean and the resilience of it. Even in that drought pressure, still managed to put together in totality a really strong crop. And of course, this is all against the backdrop of really robust demand, both domestically and internationally. If that demand wasn't there, you wouldn't be seeing these waves of crush capacity and announcements, because your majors there are all looking at the downstream markets and seeing an opportunity. Strong margins on the crush side as well. So, send out those market signals that are calling for, potentially more beans because there is ample demand at the end of the value chain.
Well, that's the thing, is that we're doing this without all of this renewable diesel. And we're using the hell out of beans without all this renewable diesel. Is that the expectation in 2022? Because we're not going to have renewable diesel online in 1 year from now, are we? Are these plants coming online in the next 6 to 12 months?
There is a lot of expansion scheduled for this year. And actually earlier this year, if you think about the whole biomass-based diesel industry or complex, which is basically traditional esterified biodiesel. So the biodiesel.
Esterified,
yeah.
Wait a minute. If I'm teaching people the word misanthropic and misanthrope, and now you're bringing me esterified?
Well, it actually goes through a transesterification process. So it has to do with the fat of it. Now, this is where I'm exhausting any scientific and chemistry knowledge I have. So we've gone right to the edge there. A renewable diesel undergoes a different chemical treatment process. It's more hydro-treating, like much more similar to traditional petroleum-based diesel manufacturing. So, that's the extent of the chemistry I'm going to get into here. Earlier this year, you actually had capacity for renewable diesel surpass that traditional biodiesel base for the first time. So it's continuing to grow. The incremental growth in the biomass-based diesel market in terms of capacity over the last 5-6 years, you've seen a lot more of that growth being borne by renewable diesel facilities.
Yeah.
Now, it's taken it to a roughly 3 billion gallon market across those two fuels, plus relatively small amounts of stable aviation fuel. But in the years to come, you base it on plant announcements, and actually Bunge in their earnings call last week, indicated that the market could be upwards of 5 billion gallons by the end of 2024. Again, if you're basing it off of plant announcements and doing some handicapping on some things that get built or don't get built, or seeing traditional refineries flip over to being renewable diesel refineries. So there's, I think, a lot of bullishness in that sector. Some of the announcements over the last couple of weeks notwithstanding, but you look at the private sector entities, you hear things out of Bunge, you hear things out of Chevron. They of course have a joint venture together where they want to be sourcing feedstock and expanding Bunge's production capabilities on the crush side. These are all the sort of it's just one example of the exciting partnerships that are helping to come together to build out this industry in the coming years. And with that, you said we've been using the oil. We've found lots of good uses for it historically, and now this is kind of this next real seismic wave.
Yeah. And so I know you got to go. So let's go back to the innovation challenge, which is new utilizations for the meal. Like I said, we've been using animal food for a long, long time. It is the protein source that's a go-to for dairy rations, hog rations, chicken rations, et cetera. What do these people need to know if they say, hey, man, I head up this department that would love to hop in on us? If they want to be a part of the innovation challenge, what do they do?
Well, we've got an application at Yield Lab Institute at their website, and then
Yield Lab Institute. Our person primarily coordinating this is their chief operating officer, Brandon Day. He's a good friend of mine. So you can check out Yield Lab Institute. We also have links to the application and media on unitedsoybean.org, because of course this is something we're very excited about. We've actually recently extended the deadline for applications, so we've got about a week, close at midnight Central Time on December 20th. So for innovators out there who might be listening to the podcast and haven't yet submitted or thinking about submitting, go check out Yield Lab Institute. And also, when's the deadline?
December 20th.
Oh, well, it sounds like we got a short amount of time to get this out there. So we'll get it out there. All right. But the main thing is, most people that are listening to this aren't necessarily going to be involved in the innovation challenge, but it's important.
You might know people. Yeah.
It's important for them to know what we're doing out here to create demand. Okay, close me out here. I know you got to get on another call. What else do I need to know about soybeans looking ahead from the VP of Market Intelligence rolling into 2023, Mac Marshall? What do I need to know?
Well, we've seen that kind of reversal over the last couple of weeks in the meal oil balance, which has been a little bit more reverting to that traditional split. But of course, meal is holding about 58% of the value. Oil's holding over 40%, 42%. At least I really checked earlier today. So some of those shifts, are still remaining intact and structurally there. So seeing that kind of, those two co-products keeping the value of beans intact is of course important. Now we got to be looking to the whole bean markets in the months to come. It's December, which means that production is moving along in South America. There have been some delays in getting some of the plants in the ground down there, but over the coming weeks, really that January February period, as typically when Brazil enters its peak export window, we'll be looking to see what the crop in its later stages starts to look like. Because of course, this time last year in December, world was expecting a pretty huge crop out of South America, and then of course that didn't come to fruition.
Right.
Expectations aren't nearly as dire this time around, but there has been pressure in Argentina and some parts of Brazil. So that'll bear a lot of monitoring, because whatever comes out of the ground in Brazil and makes it into the international marketplace, I think will play a role in the prices that farmers are looking at as they're making their crop plans for spring 2023. So even though might not be a lot of field work going on right now, there is never a dull moment in global ag.
There is never, and I remember at this very time last year, meaning December of 2021, the expectation that we were going to have more soy acres in the United States than corn for only the second or third time in our history of record keeping, and it didn't happen because American farmers love to grow corn, and the soybean economics weren't quite as good as we thought they were going to be.
Well, it took me by surprise as well, but when the numbers did finally come out in the end, I was thinking back to a number of conversations that I had with farmers this time last year. We're talking fertilizer, we're talking crop plans, and farmers are balancing both economic viability of crops. You're looking at your expected net returns, but they're also balancing what's going to be most agronomically sound for the land. And sticking to those rotations for managing the nitrogen cycle is something that is really paramount for farmers. I think maybe something that is underappreciated. It's not just about that bottom line in terms of dollars and cents. It's also about, how do you make sure that your operations in the form of your land and everything are stewarded well for this year and generations to come, central in the mind of our farmers.
Yeah, and it was one of those, we talked about, was the fertilizer availability going to change the planting mix, and it really didn't. His name is Mac Marshall. He's got to hop on our call. I overstayed my welcome with him, but that's okay, because as I want to point out, he's one of the 14 people I actually like. All right. If you want to find him, go to the United Soybean Board. He's the VP of Market Intelligence there. Thanks so much for being on and talking about this. It's called the Innovation Challenge, and you might have already missed it by the time you're listening to this, but it doesn't matter. Stay tuned, because they might be coming up with some really cool new ideas on how to remember. One thing I always like to say, 100 years ago, there was only 100 and some 1,000 acres of soybeans in the United States of America, and last year we planted 87 million. So a century ago, soybeans were this brand new crazy plant from Asia, and we went from 100,000 acres a century ago to 87 million. So you know what? It's because of innovation like this that's driving demand for something that is renewable and obviously very useful and makes our life better.
I couldn't have said it better. You never know what the world's going to look like 100 years from now, and soy's testament to that. But we also have the other challenge coming up later in the spring, so we'll stay tuned for that, because that's about thinking about those next potential channels of demand and how we.
We'll have to bring you back to talk about that.
I think we might just have to.
All right. Until next time, he's Mac Marshall. I'm Damian Mason. It's the Business of Agriculture. Hey, thanks for being here. This episode of the Business of Agriculture was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You've heard me talk about Pattern Ag because I think it's a pretty cool concept. New technology that allows you to predict the problems you're going to have and therefore treat them before those problems cost you money. What kind of problems am I talking about? Pests, and disease. Things like cordon rootworm, sudden death syndrome, cyst nematode, and a whole bunch of other bad things that happen out there in the field that can cost you money. Guess what? Pattern Ag will let you find out ahead of time if the disease or the pest pressure is there, and therefore you're treating it before it costs you any money. What a great concept. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to learn more about their product, their technology, how it can make you money, save you yield, and also where you can find a rep that can come out there and do the work for you. Pattern.ag.